Welcome to the Hindu Daily. We're diving straight into a really critical issue in India's agricultural sector today. It's about a policy failure that's reached a bit of a crisis point.
We're talking about the food grain procurement system.
Exactly, which is sitting on a truly staggering surplus. And at the same time, it's just bleeding the national treasury. The immediate spark for this was a local controversy down in Tamil Nadu.
And that's a perfect place to start, actually, because that local problem, that microcosm, really reveals the larger national issue.
So what happened there?
Well, in Tamil Nadu, during the recent Kuruvai season, the paddy procurement process just completely broke down.
Broke down how?
We saw massive time overruns, huge lines of farmers waiting for days, and then on top of that, serious charges of corruption against the Tamil Nadu Civil Supplies Corporation, the TNCSC. The system just couldn't handle the sheer volume of paddy coming in.
And the volume issue, that's the real crux of it, isn't it? Why was there so much paddy to begin with?
Because for a farmer, growing paddy is the single safest financial decision they can make. They're guaranteed the minimum support price, the MSP.
It's a safe bet.
It's a safe bet, exactly, regardless of what the market is doing. So in Tamil Nadu this season, that assurance led to crop coverage soaring by nearly 2 lakh acres, more than anyone anticipated.
And the authorities knew this was coming.
Oh, yes. The kicker is, they knew this surge was coming as far back as mid-August. But the logistics, the infrastructure, it just wasn't ready. And this perpetual assurance, completely divorced from actual demand, is what creates this national glut.
Okay, so let's scale this up from Tamil Nadu to the national level because the numbers are genuinely startling. How large is this glut?
The statistics are, frankly, unsustainable. If we look at the all-India paddy procurement, which gets measured as rice, it hit nearly 119.86 lakh tons as of October 31st, 2025.
And how does that compare to last year?
It's a massive jump. Last year on the same day, it was around 82.08 lakh tons. But the critical number isn't just the procurement, it's what we're holding in stock versus what we actually need.
Right, the storage norm versus the reality.
For 3 straight years now, the opening stock for rice has been consistently double the central pool requirement. The norm, the strategic stock we need for emergencies in the PDS is about 102.5 lakh tons.
And what did we have this October?
356.1 lakh tons.
Wow.
We're sitting on over 3 times the required buffer stock. Think about the physical, logistical nightmare that represents. It's a mountain of grain.
It's not just a number on a balance sheet. And that massive food subsidy we hear about, around 2 lakh crore annually, a lot of that is just financing the surplus then.
It's financing the procurement, the massive logistics, and crucially, the massive storage costs. Silos are strained, you have pest control, spoilage, and the interest on the money borrowed to buy grain that just sits there for years.
And the imbalance between what we buy, the procurement, and what we use, the offtake, just makes it worse for rice.
It does. We procure between 525 and 547 lakh tons of rice a year, but the PDS only uses between 392 and 427 lakh tons. The excess just keeps piling up. Interestingly, with wheat, it's often the other way around. Sometimes we use more than we procure.
Which tells you the incentives are all wrong. And that brings us to this huge national paradox. We have this enormous, costly surplus of cereals.
While at the same time, we are hemorrhaging money importing other essential foods.
Like edible oil and pulses.
It is the definition of a policy contradiction. We spent 1.2 lakh crore on edible oil imports in 2023-24. Another euro 30,000 crore on pulses. We're spending fortunes managing a surplus of one thing while being dangerously dependent on others.
And the edible oil story is particularly telling, isn't it? We import about 55% of our demand.
And that wasn't an accident. Experts trace it back to policy decisions in the 1990s. The government allowed cheap, low-tariff imports of edible oils, mostly palm oil, to control inflation.
Which made it impossible for Indian farmers to compete.
It systematically depressed domestic production of oil seeds. Why grow mustard when cheap foreign oil undercuts your price every time? It created the structural dependency we see today.
And with pulses, we're the world's largest producer, yet we still import them because our own procurement at MSP has fallen.
It just shows a total failure in policy signaling. The whole situation raises these big questions. Is this sustainable? Are we promoting paddy at the cost of vital crop rotation? The answer to both is clearly no.
So what's the path forward? How do we break this cycle?
The core solution is crop diversification. But it has to be incentivized intelligently. You need financial support, yes, but also guidance based on area-specific market studies. Farmers are risk-averse. They need to know there's a buyer if they switch from paddy to pulses.
And we also need to deal with the mountain of rice we already have.
And that means avoiding knee-jerk restrictions on exports. Let farmers benefit from selling the surplus overseas rather than letting it rot in government silos.
And what about the procurement system itself? Does it need to be so centralized?
No, and facilitating farmers' producers organizations, or FPOs, is key here. They can connect, say, black ribbon farmers directly with pad manufacturers. It shortens the supply chain and shifts some of the procurement load away from the state. West Bengal has had some success with this.
But even if you fix procurement, there's still the problem of leakage in the distribution system.
Yes, and that's a huge trust issue. An Iger report suggested a shocking 28% loss of rice and wheat during distribution. Whether it's waste or corruption, that's an enormous amount of the subsidy just vanishing.
All right, moving from the very tangible problem of grain to the much more abstract idea of national well-being. Let's talk about the World Happiness Report 2025. These rankings always cause a stir, and this year the results are, well, they're deeply puzzling for India.
The headline is definitely a shock. Finland is #1 again for the 8th year running. India, meanwhile, is way down to 118.
But it's the comparison with our neighbors that's so jarring. Pakistan, which is struggling economically, scores higher at 109.
Right, and that's the paradox. India is the world's 5th largest economy, at $3.7 trillion GDP. Pakistan's is around $375 billion. How does that economic reality not translate into the happiness rankings?
So it's clearly not just about money. What's the methodology here?
It relies heavily on the Gallup World Polls Cantrell ladder. People are asked to imagine a ladder and rate their life satisfaction from 0, the worst possible life, to 10, the best.
It's a subjective rating.
A very subjective rating, which then correlated with 6 variables: GDP per capita, social support, life expectancy, freedom, generosity, and perception of corruption.
Okay, so let's get into what this source is called a perception trap. This sounds important.
It's insidious. Basically, people in societies that have adapted to continuous hardship or who just have lower expectations often report higher levels of happiness. A small improvement feels massive.
Whereas in a vibrant, media-saturated democracy like India.
Exactly. Aspirations are rising. People see what better governance looks like, what cleaner cities look like. They know what they should expect.
So our dissatisfaction might actually be a sign of ambition, not misery.
It could very well be. When people report low satisfaction, it might signal higher expectations and a demand for improvement. The report can easily conflate that healthy democratic restlessness with actual unhappiness.
And then there's the critique about the weird bias.
Yes, WEIRD stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. The methodology inherently prioritizes values and structures common in these societies. Specifically, it puts a huge weight on institutional trust.
The belief that the police will help you or that a lost wallet will be returned.
Right, that classic Finnish example. But in a vast country like India, institutional trust is uneven, to say the least. The real safety net for most people isn't the state, it's the collective trust network.
Family, community, neighbors.
Precisely. These deep social bonds are what protect people. And the report tends to under-index this kind of trust, even though it admits that a belief in community kindness is a better predictor of happiness than income.
So the policy path forward for India should be less about just chasing GDP growth and more about connection and empathy.
That's the key takeaway. There's a worrying global statistic cited in the sources. Nearly 19% of young adults say they have no one to rely on. That's up 39% since 2006. India cannot afford that kind of social erosion.
So what are the actionable pathways to boost, say, gross national happiness?
The experts propose 3. First, actively rebuild social capital. Create community spaces, promote shared activities, get people interacting offline.
Okay.
Second, restore institutional trust. Make public services simpler, more transparent, more reliable. And third, and this is crucial, recognize mental health as a core economic policy.
How so?
The WHO estimates that for every dollar spent treating common mental health issues, the return is $4 in improved productivity. It's not a luxury, it's an economic imperative. So maybe that low score for India isn't misery. Maybe it's just the sound of an ambitious, unfinished nation demanding more.
Let's move now to a very concrete physical threat. We're talking about the proposed NH701A highway in Jammu and Kashmir. Building roads is usually seen as development, but in these incredibly sensitive mountain regions, the risks can be catastrophic.
The magnification factor in J&K is exponential. The Ministry of Road Transport and Highways issued a tender for this two-lane highway, NH701A, which will stretch from Shopian to Magam.
And the route is the problem.
The route is the problem. It's set to cut right through highly sensitive, pristine ecological zones like Uusmarg and Dudapathri.
What makes this region so uniquely fragile?
It's a combination of things. You have very steep gradients, fragile soil and rock, and it's in a high seismic zone, so any ground disturbance is risky. But most critically, the entire hydrological system, the rivers and streams, they all rely on glaciers.
So any major infrastructure work, especially cutting into slopes, has far-reaching consequences.
And often irreversible ones. Which raises the question of necessity. The road goes through forested, sparsely populated areas where some basic connectivity already exists. Is the high ecological risk really justified?
Let's talk about those specific risks. There are recent precedents, aren't there?
There are. A 2023 study on a similar road nearby, the Bathlias-Poshiana Road, showed a high probability of catastrophic slope failure during heavy rain. The construction itself destabilizes slopes that have been in a precarious balance for thousands of years.
And this brings us to the regulatory environment, which has actually been weakened for projects near the border.
That's right. In 2022, the Ministry of Environment issued a notification exempting highway projects within 100 kilometers of the line of control from needing a prior environmental impact assessment, an EIA.
For national security reasons.
For national security reasons. But that exemption is not a free pass. There are still standard operating procedures from 2023 that mandate rigorous studies.
Like what kind of studies?
Slope stability assessments, disaster management plans, eco-fragility studies, detailed hydrological surveys. These are non-negotiable scientific requirements for building in this terrain.
And this is a crucial part. There is currently no public evidence that any of these studies have even been started for the NH701A project.
And that lack of transparency is the core governance failure here. When you dilute environmental scrutiny for security, the responsibility on the authorities to follow the remaining safeguards becomes even greater. Right now, there's a real fear those steps are being ignored.
And what about the human cost, the impact on local communities?
Uusmarg and Dudapathri aren't just empty wilderness. They are vital ancestral grazing grounds for the Gujar and Bakarwal pastoralist communities. A highway threatens to cut off their migratory routes and reduce their grazing land, pushing already vulnerable groups further to the margins.
Finally, let's circle back to the water, the hydrological threat.
Road construction means blasting and cutting, which leads to erosion. That sediment washes into the streams, degrading water quality. In a region already stressed by climate change and melting glaciers, this could compromise long-term water security for everyone downstream. This project is really a litmus test for environmental governance in J&K.
All right, let's shift dramatically now from geology to a fascinating story from the world of science. We're talking about using music therapy in, of all places, an operation theater. A trial in Delhi has shown the quantifiable power of sound.
This is a classic low-cost, high-impact idea. Researchers at Lok Nayak Hospital wanted to see if music could reduce the need for general anesthetic agents during minor surgery, in this case, gallbladder removal.
Less powerful drugs, hopefully meaning a faster, cleaner recovery.
Exactly. They set up a randomized controlled trial with 56 adults. One group listened to music on noise-canceling headphones. The control group wore identical silent headphones.
And this wasn't just any old playlist, right? The music was very specific.
Very specific. They used slow flute and piano music, featuring two Hindustani ragas. Raga Yaman, which is seen as uplifting, and Raga Kirvani, known for its calming effect. They were chosen specifically to modulate the body's fight-or-flight response.
The sympathetic nervous system.
The sympathetic nervous system. Even when a patient is unconscious, the ability to hear remains remarkably intact. The music acts as a counterstimulus, telling the body to relax, even when it's under the stress of surgery.
And it worked. The lead investigator called it a eureka moment.
It absolutely did. The group listening to the ragas required, on average, 15% less propofol, which is that powerful, fast-acting anesthetic.
That's a significant reduction.
It is.
Oh.
And their vital signs, heart rate, blood pressure, were much steadier throughout. Their cortisol levels, the stress hormone, were also significantly lower.
And what stands out to me is the impact on opioid use. They needed less fentanyl.
And that's the huge public health takeaway here. Fentanyl is at the heart of the opioid crisis. Finding a non-pharmacological, safe way to manage pain and stress in the OR, allowing doctors to use less of a powerful synthetic opioid, is incredibly valuable.
And the intervention itself is so simple. Low cost, non-pharmacological, no side effects.
As one researcher said, all you need is a Bluetooth device and a pair of headphones. In a resource-stretched hospital, this could reduce drug costs, speed up recovery, and free up beds faster.
There was a practical note of caution from a UK expert, though.
Right. You can't totally block out the patient's hearing. The surgical team still needs to communicate, so the volume levels need to be managed carefully. But the team in Delhi is already planning larger trials to refine this. It's a fantastic example of integrating an ancient low-tech solution into modern medicine.
Let's shift our focus now to the deep structures of Indian governance, specifically the financial backbone of our local democracy. We're looking at the expectations writing on the 16th Finance Commission.
The Finance Commission's role is absolutely massive. It has two key mandates under Article 280 of the Constitution. The first one gets all the attention: how much money the center shares with the states.
The vertical and horizontal transfers.
Exactly. But the second mandate, which is often neglected, is just as vital. It's to recommend measures to improve the finances of our local bodies, the 2.7 lakh panchayats and 5,000 municipalities.
And this is where the system so often breaks down. Local bodies are tasked with essential public services, but they just don't have the funds to deliver them.
That gap between responsibility and revenue is enormous. They handle water, sanitation, local assets, but state governments assign these tasks without giving them the power to raise enough money to pay for them.
The Constitution tried to fix this with the 11th and 12th schedules, which list all the functions for panchayats and municipalities.
It did. 29 subjects for panchayats, 18 for municipalities. But here's the crucial legal point. Those schedules are merely illustrative. They're not binding. State legislatures decide how much power and revenue is actually devolved.
So local bodies end up as just implementation agencies, not real institutions of self-governance.
Precisely. Now, the theoretical fix for this is the State Finance Commission, or SFC.
But in practice, they're not very effective.
It's a political problem. They're constitutionally mandated. But despite over 100 reports being submitted, hardly any have been respected. State governments just ignore them. This forces local governments to rely entirely on the lifeline from the Union Finance Commission.
And the union FCs have had a very inconsistent approach over the years.
The discontinuity is a huge problem. The 13th FC, for instance, had a brilliant innovation. They suggested calculating the grant to local bodies as a percentage share of the union tax pool.
Which would mean their funding grows automatically as the economy grows.
Exactly. It protects against inflation and gives them a share in tax buoyancy. But then the 14th and 15th FCs just abandoned that approach. They went back to giving ad hoc lump sum grants.
A complete U-turn.
A complete U-turn. And they made things worse with conditional grant chaos. Each FC would introduce its own new set of reform conditions, ignoring what the previous one had done.
So you're a mayor trying to meet one set of targets, and 5 years later, the goalposts are moved completely.
It creates a cycle of unfulfilled conditions and dependency. So the big hope for the 16th FC is that they move beyond this off-beaten approach. The hope is they will properly assess and quantify the actual resource requirements of our local bodies so they can finally function as intended.
All right, let's move back to agriculture, but this time looking at the complex legal world of seeds. The center is planning to introduce amendments to the Protection of Plant Variety and Farmers' Rights Act.
And this review is quite timely. The Act has been around for 2 decades, and breeding technology has advanced so rapidly in that time. A committee is consulting with stakeholders to address the deficiencies.
And the tension is always between protecting the intellectual property of breeders and the traditional rights of farmers.
That's the core conflict. On the technical side, they're looking to modernize some definitions. For example, expanding the definition of seed to include all kinds of vegetatively propagated material.
So not just a traditional seed, but also things like tissue culture plantlets.
Exactly. Tissue culture plantlets, synthetic seeds, bulbs, grafts, anything that propagates a variety to make sure the law keeps up with the science. They also want a clearly defined institution to include both public and private breeders.
And what about enforcement?
They're trying to add more teeth. They want to define an abusive act, like selling a protected variety under a different name, to confuse people and make it clearly punishable.
But this is where the conflict with farmer groups comes in. They see this IPR framework as a threat.
They see it as a direct threat to their traditional practices of seed saving and sharing. Groups like the Samyukt Kisan Morcha are demanding provisions to register all community-developed seeds.
To stop private companies from monopolizing them.
Yes. They're worried a company could take a community-developed variety, tweak it slightly, and then register it under an individual name, preventing the community from using its own seed freely.
It's a fundamental clash of worldviews.
It is. The IPR framework grants exclusive economic rights, but for small farmers, seed is a shared communal resource. The law tries to bridge that gap, but the friction is always there.
And there's one more critical gap in the current law.
A very serious one. The Act says farmers should be compensated if a protected seed variety fails to perform as promised. But the specific criteria for compensating farmers have never actually been detailed in the rules. So there's no clear mechanism for farmers to get that compensation. That's a gap that urgently needs to be fixed.
Let's tackle a concept we all see in our medical reports but rarely understand, the idea of normal. The notion that there's a fixed, universal standard for health is, well, a myth. And we can start with the paradox of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
He's the perfect example. His BMI is 33. According to standard WHO charts, anything over 30 is classified as obese. But clearly, his health profile is not what we think of as obese. It shows the number alone is almost meaningless without context.
And the boundaries of normal are not fixed biological laws. They're constantly shifting based on new research.
Absolutely. The WHO used to have universal BMI cutoffs, but studies show that Asian populations develop issues like diabetes at lower body weights. So they revised the normal upper limit for Asians down to 23. That proves normal is just a statistical boundary based on population data.
So when you look at that reference range on a blood test, what is it statistically?
It's the central 95% of results from a healthy population, which means two things. First, 5% of perfectly healthy people will always fall outside that range. And second, being within the range doesn't guarantee you're healthy, just a guide for the doctor.
You used a great analogy. Health and illness aren't a clean border. They're a fluid gradient, like the shift between Tamil and Malayalam speakers on the state border.
They blend into each other. Think about the cutoff for diabetes. 126 milli-DL for fasting glucose. That number wasn't discovered in nature. It's a practical clinical compromise. It's the point where the risk of complications rises sharply enough that we need to intervene.
And drawing that line is a balance between sensitivity and specificity.
It's a constant trade-off. Set the bar high, you avoid overdiagnosing healthy people, but you might miss some real cases. Set the bar low, you catch everyone, but you get a lot of false positives. It's a judgment call.
And beyond the cutoffs, the sheer variability of our biology makes interpretation tricky.
Biological data is messy. Things like sodium are tightly controlled, so small deviations matter a lot. But cholesterol can vary widely. Hormones are the trickiest. They fluctuate wildly based on the time of day, stress, age. You can't just look at the number.
Which is why the standard bell curve doesn't always apply.
Right. A lot of biological data is skewed, so labs have to use percentiles, and to do that reliably, they need data from at least 120 healthy local individuals.
Which brings us to a huge problem in the Indian context: the lack of local data.
Normal for whom is the question. Reference ranges have to be population-specific. Men have higher red cell counts, people at high altitudes have higher hemoglobin. The problem is, for many common tests in India, we're still borrowing Western benchmarks, which risks both over- and under-diagnosis.
So that little line at the bottom of every lab report is actually the most important instruction.
Please correlate with clinical findings. That's everything. It tells the doctor, take this number, but integrate it with the patient's full story, their physical exam, their symptoms, the numbers guide, but context is king.
Let's shift gears into the business world and talk about the biggest source of anxiety right now: AI. Specifically, how organizations can prepare their employees for this revolution without creating panic.
This was a key finding from the recent SAP Connect event, backed by a big global survey. The core problem isn't the tech itself, it's the lack of understanding, which creates this huge AI literacy divide.
And AI literacy is more than just knowing how to write a good prompt, right?
It's much broader. It's the ability to detect, understand, and critically evaluate the technology. And the survey quantified the emotional cost of not having it. People with low AI literacy were 6 times more apprehensive and 8 times more distressed about using AI.
That's a direct link between knowledge and confidence.
A very direct link. Nearly 70% of high literacy individuals expected positive outcomes from AI, compared to only 29% of low literacy ones. So organizations need to focus on the foundations. How does it work? When are you using it? And what are the ethics?
And the sources say that HR departments are often failing here, using vague platitudes instead of clear communication.
Yes, that classic line, oh, AI will just take the tasks you don't want to do anyway. That vague reassurance actually fuels job security worries. 31% of people surveyed were worried about their jobs, and that's fueled by a lack of clear vision from leadership.
And because AI is evolving so fast, static planning is useless.
The advice is to move away from a one-time strategic work redesign. It has to be dynamic work redesign, constantly adjusting roles and processes as the technology changes.
But there's a paradox here. Employees say AI saves them time, but organizations aren't seeing the ROI.
That's right. Employees report saving about 75 minutes a day with AI tools. But that saved time is often canceled out by something called work slop.
Work slop, what's that?
It's AI-generated content that looks okay on the surface, but lacks substance or accuracy, so humans have to spend time correcting it or redoing it. It actually erodes trust in the tool.
Which explains the tough finding from the MIT Media Lab.
It does. They found that 95% of organizations have seen no measurable return on their AI investments. The lesson is you can't just buy the tech. You have to champion the change with training, pilot programs, and continuous evaluation to actually see a return.
All right, for our final section, let's look at an unexpected consequence of this AI revolution. It's massive energy demand and how that's creating a supply crunch in the carbon offset market.
This is a critical link. Big tech giants like Microsoft and Google are building massive data centers to power AI. This drives up their energy use and their emissions.
But they also have these ambitious net zero goals.
Right. So their rising profits and rising emissions translate directly into a huge urgent demand for high-quality, durable carbon removal credits.
And we're talking about the expensive ones, the long-term storage solutions.
Exactly. These durable credits, which physically store CO2 for centuries, are nearly 4 times more expensive than just planting trees. We're talking about things like biochar converting biomass into a stable charcoal or direct air capture.
And big tech's aggressive buying is causing a serious supply shortage.
A severe crunch. Demand is surging. About 25 million tons of these credits have been purchased this year, up from 8 million last year, but less than 1 million tons have actually been issued and verified. Demand is vastly outstripping the available supply.
But surprisingly, experts are saying this scarcity is actually a good thing.
They're calling it a virtuous cycle. The supply crunch, driven by these companies with deep pockets, forces the price of carbon removal up. And higher prices are exactly what this nascent market needs.
Why is that?
Because it signals value and spurs investment. It gives startups and developers the financial incentive they need to innovate, get financing, and scale up these very expensive technologies. The price becomes a catalyst.
So how are companies like Microsoft getting around the shortage to secure their future supply?
They're moving to long-term offtake agreements. Instead of buying on the spot market, they commit to purchasing credits years in advance. This gives developers sales certainty, which lets them secure loans to build their facilities. It's a way to guarantee future supply. The logic is that this extra demand will, eventually, drive the extra supply we need to meet our climate goals.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.